I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I know the weather's not great, but pretty good turnout. My name is William Persing, and I'm the Vice President of Events for the Bucknell Conservatives Club. It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for tonight, David Horowitz. Mr. Horowitz is a renowned conservative political activist and a known combatant against bias on college campuses. A founding member of the New Left in the 1960s, Mr. Horowitz underwent an ideological change culminating in his complete rejection of Marxian theory. Along with a large number of books and publications, Mr. Horowitz is also a founding and the current president of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, an editor for Front Page Magazine, and a contributor to Newsmax Media. Tonight, Mr. Horowitz will be giving a lecture entitled The Future of Academic Freedom. I'd like to thank Intercollegiate Studies Institute for sponsoring the event. ISI has been around since 1953 and is an organization dedicated to the principles which make America free and prosperous. I'd also like to thank Bucknell University for giving us the facilities tonight. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mr. David Horowitz.
Well, I'll take this opportunity to speak to you. I was going to speak to you afterwards, but my name is Emily Buck. I'm with the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and we are pleased to be able to work with the Bucknell Conservatives Club tonight. And what we do is we work with students to give them a true education, a true liberal education, because we believe that the only way to maintain a free society is for students to really get this education that they deserve. And we do that by publishing books. We give all our books to students free of charge. We have an honors program so students can really learn the basic principles of American freedom. And we also work with students to bring in speakers such as Mr. Horowitz. So if any of you would like to sign up for ISI for free membership to learn more about us, you can speak to me afterwards. And without further ado, Mr. David Horowitz.
I've been asked by the students to speak about academic freedom and free speech. They're not the same thing. Let me just ask, anybody in this room who's not a conservative? Thanks for coming. That's two. Any professors? This is reflective of what our campuses are like now. They're monolithic, relatively monolithic institutions when it comes to, and closed-minded when it comes to diversity of thought. I can't think of an institution in American society that's more regressive than our universities, and I'll explain why in the course of this talk. For those of you who don't know me, and for my parents were card-carrying members of the Communist Party. I grew up in what's called the progressive left, and stayed in the left. I was one of the founders of the New Left, one of the organizers of the anti-Vietnam movement. It's really an anti-America and Vietnam movement. And in the 70s, a friend of mine was murdered by the Black Panther Party, who were then the heroes of the left. And I saw everybody cover up these murders. There was several. And I learned then a very hard lesson, which is that what people say may sound very good, but if you don't look at what they do, you're going to get yourself and other people into a world of trouble. I also saw in Vietnam, we had wanted America to lose the Vietnam War. That's what there is no anti-war movement in America of any size. I can never gauge how young people are, but you probably remember something about the Iraq War. there wasn't an anti-war movement over the Iraq War because there never was a demonstration in front of the Iraqi embassy. When Saddam Hussein was keeping the UN inspectors out, he violated 16 UN Security Council resolutions, not one anti-war demonstration at the Iraqi embassy. It's all about America and attacking America. And the revelation for me came when the communists won, thanks to us. There was, as Nixon said, there would be a bloodbath. And well over 100,000 Vietnamese were massacred by the communists. 500,000, or actually it was 1 million people, fled. And of course, in Cambodia, the communists killed 2.5 million people. There wasn't a single protest by progressives against those crimes. That taught me a very profound lesson about the left, and that's why I'm here today speaking as a conservative. Our language is inverted. Liberals, conservatives are liberals. If you're among conservatives, you know, they disagree about everything, and not just marginal disagreements, but profound disagreements. They disagree over abortion, they disagree over immigration, they disagree over free trade, they disagreed over the Iraq War. And one thing I found very liberating when I became a conservative is I never had to look over my shoulder and be worried that I might say something that was so politically incorrect that I'd lose all my friends, as I did when I dissented from the left. Anyway, I got interested in universities because I would go to college campuses as a conservative, and I listened to the conservative kids, talk to them. And I remembered my own experience at Columbia when I went to Columbia in the McCarthy 50s. I graduated in 59. That's how ancient I am. And I was a Marxist. And I wrote Marxist papers. And I never had a professor single me out as a Marxist. Never. I never had any professor say to me, let's hear how Horowitz explains why communists kill so many people. And looking back, I wondered, what that would have done to my college education if my professor was overtly political in a classroom. How that would have affected my learning. It would have put a barrier between me and the professor, for one. And professors have a responsibility to all their students, not just to those who agree with them. And I saw how conservative kids are harassed by their so-called liberal professors. I don't regard liberals as liberal. I regard myself as liberal and conservatives as liberal because we believe in fairness, in two sides to a conversation. Whereas liberals are always interrupting conservatives because, well, it's true, and they're very intolerant that way. And I will explain, I hope, in the course of this why that's the case. Our universities used to be, in this country, universally, training institutions for ministers and priests. They were religious institutions. Every university, I don't know the history of Bucknell, but every university, whether it's Harvard or Yale or whatever, in the 19th century was a training institution. And therefore, the mission of the faculty at these institutions was to indoctrinate students. That is, to instill a particular, actually denominational doctrine in their students. That was their mission. And then there was a great transformation at the end of the 19th century. And when what we call the modern research university was born. And that's because of the rise of science and industry. And scientists can't operate on a doctrinal basis. Scientists have to look at the facts. They have to compare the evidence with the theory. And there has to be Now, of course, science doesn't always operate this way. Scientists are quite political themselves, but the whole scientific enterprise would collapse if there was an imposed doctrine. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the, great moments in the history of science, like Galileo standing up against a doctrine on the basis of what he had observed in reality. And there was a founding document, the American Association of University Professors, which was actually a liberal organization then, came up with a declaration on the principles of academic freedom. And academic freedom meant two things. One for professors, and that was that faculty should have the freedom to report what they had found in their research without reprisal. That's the basic idea of academic freedom. And they were given tenure, that is lifetime jobs, to protect them, to be able to do research and bring forth, the knowledge that they gained from that, at least as they saw it, because that was a great service to society. And on the other side, professors were expected not to indoctrinate students. That's what the 19th century did. So if you look up the statement, it says it's not the purpose of a professor to indoctrinate his or her students, and therefore the professor must present divergent opinions divergent from his own, in a fair-minded manner. This university has an academic freedom provision. It's the 1940 statement of the AAUP. They had two major statements, one in 1915 and one in 1940, which says that a professor may teach his point of view, but he must not introduce controversial matter into the classroom that's irrelevant to the subject. Anybody who's been in a classroom these days knows that that's completely violated on this campus and every other campus. When a professor goes into a rant about Sarah Palin or Newt Gingrich or whatever is the object of his bile or her bile of the day, that's a violation of students' academic freedom. However, there's nobody to enforce it. I usually begin my talks on academic freedom by saying you can't get a good education if they're only telling you half the story. Even if you're paying $42,000 a year. It can't be done. And the fact of the matter is that none of you are getting a good education for your $42,000 in terms of these liberal arts subjects that are about society. And the students who are getting the really short end of the stick are liberal students, or as I prefer to call them, leftist students and progressive students. And why is that? Because your assumptions are never challenged. If you are a conservative student at this university or any university, and you open your mouth and let people know that you have a conservative view, you better be prepared to defend yourself. And you better have, you can't defend yourself from what you're getting in the classroom because they're not giving you the two sides of the story or the three sides. So it's the conservative students who are actually benefiting from this terrible situation that exists in our universities. Now, I did a little homework. I went up to your website, and I'm going to pick on women's and gender studies, only because it's so blatant, so obvious, and so absurd. Here's a department. This is supposed to be an academic department. An academic inquiry does not have its mind made up before it goes in and makes the inquiry. It looks at the facts. It can have a hypothesis. That's, the way knowledge proceeds. You have an idea, but then you check it against the facts and against other theories. And let me just back up one second and say that you can. The idea of education in a democracy that's compatible with academic freedom is this: students are taught how to think. They're not told what to think. Huge difference. If my professors had said, Horowitz, you're a Marxist, don't you realize that Marxism has killed 50 million people and bankrupted whole continents, and it's, just a crock? If they had said that to me, my mind would have, I would be at war with them. My mind would be closed. What my professors did was they taught us how to assemble evidence, how to present it, and how to try to figure out for ourselves what conclusions we came to. We come to the wrong conclusions, that's fine. Actually, I can remember when I was a senior, they had us meet with the alumni and this old codger, probably my age. I was complaining about the curriculum, and of course I was a radical. I complained about everything. And he said, I learned everything that I know after I graduated from Columbia. That's where I went. Made me so mad. And it was absolutely true. What you get in school, you get a reading list, you get to see how people think, but you're going to have to figure it out. So a professor who imposes his view or her view on you is doing a tremendous disservice to you as a student and robbing you of your education dollar. That's basically it. Now, I know there are good professors at this school, as at every school. There are people who really make the effort to do the right thing. When I went to Columbia, I didn't know the political views of a single professor I had, and that was perfectly appropriate. That's the way it should be. So on the departmental website at bucknell.edu, it explains that Women's and Gender Studies is an interdisciplinary program that examines the role of women and gender in history, literature, society, science, and culture using a variety of methodologies and feminist theoretical perspectives. So it tells you at the outset that this actually isn't an academic department, it's a political party. It's not like you have one course in feminist perspectives. It's like it's the whole department. The central goal of the program is to strengthen critical thinking and inquiry through a focus on women's experiences and the social construction of gender. The social construction of gender. How many students here have heard the phrase social construction? Social construction of race, yeah. It's really odd for the older people here who may not understand this, that the idea is that the feminine and masculine traits that we see, that we can observe, are actually constructed. They're not biologically determined, what's male and what's female. This is socially constructed. And if you go further into the theory, it's constructed by, of course, a patriarchy, by men, so they can oppress women. Because all these professors are fundamentally addicted to the Marxist paradigm that society is divided into the dominators and the dominated, the oppressors and the oppressed. It's a zero-sum game. Now, the problem with this is that if you walk across, well, I haven't been on your campus, or maybe you don't have to walk across a hall, but you go into the next building, the one where the neuroscience department exists, or the biology department for that matter, and you find out that these are hardwired traits, that male and female, there's obviously a spectrum. And there are some more masculine females, more feminine males, but it's built into the genes, into the chemistry of the body. Doesn't mean there aren't social influences, but that's not what this is about. The reason that radicals, I got to turn off my phone, but I'm not going to answer this, but I was at an event. I can't get my. Anyway, would you just. I was at an event where there were like 1,500 people, and Sean Hannity was speaking, and his phone rang. And he answered. He didn't answer it this way, but he whatever, flicked the thing and said, "Say hello." And like 1,500 people said hello. It turned out it was his sister. There's a reason why leftists, radicals, want gender to be socially constructed and race and all hierarchies of merit. Why do they want it to be socially constructed? Because if it's socially constructed, then you can reconstruct it. You can change the world. You can make men and women into different types of human beings than they are. And you can create the millennium. Socialism, radicalism is a fantasy. It's a religious fantasy of taking the world and redeeming it, taking a world that's fallen. We can all see there's a lot of misery in the world. Radicals want to reconstruct the world and make it whole and make it harmonious and end racism, sexism, homophobia, et cetera, poverty, and war. That's why they're so intolerant. People on the left, progressives. If you believe you can redeem the world, if you believe you can end poverty, if you believe you can end inequality and end war, then what lie will you not tell and what crime would you not commit to achieve it? And that's why progressives killed 100 million people in the last century. They did it for a very noble cause. Nietzsche once said that idealism kills. The more noble, the more beautiful the idea, the bigger the crime it will justify. So of course you go on. It's the study of femininity and masculinity, the relations between men and women, and the differential power structures that create these social categories. So it's all about them in power and us, the voice of the oppressed. This is not knowledge. This is ideology. This is a political party which has a department in this university and is abusing students as we speak who come here, pay $42,000 a year to learn something, and instead are fed this garbage. And I say it's garbage because, look, there's a legitimate point of view that there are social influences on the way people relate as men and women. No question about it. But how would you go about it in a way that was interested in actual knowledge? You would bring in the neuroscientist. You would assign the readings in the neuroscientist. You would assign other readings. And you would let the students make up their own minds. You could give your point of view, but you wouldn't suppress these other views. And you certainly wouldn't create a department in which the condition of being a good student is to believe in the social construction of gender, or I looked at, I saw a course on race the same way. Unfortunately, there is no way. The university is run by the faculty. They have accumulated power over the last century. I've talked to many trustees and many administrators, and it's a juggernaut. I thought at one time, I developed an academic Bill of Rights. I thought students, if you put students into the equation if students would stand up for themselves. Just simple things like ask for a book that hasn't been assigned. I mean, I've looked at the reading lists at some of these courses. I mean, they're insane. They're the most extreme racist views. Of course, they're racist against whites, but they're still racist views. All the books in the course on race are written by racists. Just ask for a different book. How many students here have read a book or an article or know the name Thomas Sowell? No students. None. Thomas Sowell is the greatest living. He's black. The greatest living writer on culture and race in our country. He's at the Hoover Institution, and he's a conservative. Actually, he started out the way I did, as a leftist. He's written a whole library on culture and race, and college students are completely ignorant of his work. How many students here have read something by Cornel West or know the name? How many don't know Cornel West? Yeah. He has 20 honorary degrees. He's a complete airhead. But now there's a difference between, since I've been asked to talk about free speech as well, and I'm sorry to say that there really is no academic freedom. Professors have interpreted academic freedom to mean they can say anything they want in the classroom, outside, whatever, anything. Well, of course, outside they can. But as in their role as professors, they have a license to say anything they want. And we had demonstrations of that with, national clowns like Ward Churchill and people like him. But there's a big difference between academic freedom, which is freedom within a professional discipline. You can express your conclusions that you have drawn from 20 years of research or 10 years of research. That freedom needs to be protected. But when you have an English professor pontificating about the war in Afghanistan, that's not protected by academic freedom. If you go to your doctor, you don't want to hear a lecture on the war in Iraq, or you don't want to hear a lecture about let's re-elect Obama or let's elect Romney from your doctor. They have a professional responsibility to minister to you. Your teachers have a similar responsibility. If you don't go to your doctor's office to hear a lecture on the war in Iraq, why should you get it from your comparative literature professor or your Spanish professor? It's the same issue. Academic freedom and free speech are different. If a preacher went into a church on Sunday and gave a sermon that God doesn't exist, he'd be looking for a job on Monday, First Amendment or no. Why is that? Because these are professional institutions. They have a mission. And if you have chaos in the mission, you destroy the mission. If priests start preaching that there is no God, soon you don't have a church. And that's what's happening in our liberal arts schools and our universities. If you have professors who are indoctrinating students, as goes on, who are treating the classroom as a political platform to recruit students to their point of view, you cease to have a classroom. You cease to have a university. There are whole fields in this, not just in this school, they're nationally organized, that are worthless. Because all you're getting is ideological claptrap like women's studies, cultural anthropology, sociology, peace studies, African American studies, Chicano studies, global studies, cultural studies. These are all different varieties of Marxism with race and gender added. The First Amendment gives every American the right to embarrass themselves in public. However, it's not just about embarrassment. It's the most sacred, if I can use that word in this context, right that we have. Why is that? It's the basis of every freedom that we enjoy as Americans. If you don't have the right to say what you feel and what you think, then you don't have the right to defend any of your freedoms, and you're going to lose them. And the free speech is, the First Amendment, the right to free speech, is under massive assault in this country, and has been for some decades. How is it done? Well, the chief weapon of the left is to stigmatize their opponents. The left likes to holler McCarthyism every time anybody wants to look at what the left actually does and has done. But the left practices McCarthyism all the time. There are whole areas where a prudent person would not express their opinion if their opinion didn't fit with the majority. Racial preferences is a good example. Martin Luther King, there used to be a civil rights movement in this country that stood for one standard for everybody. We don't judge you by the color of your skin, we judge you by the content of your character. Now, everybody in this room knows that white people are being judged all the time by the color of their skin. Guilty before the fact. Affirmative action is now racial preferences. Everybody knows that admission standards are rigged for certain designated groups. It's not people of color, a phrase which I detest. It's not English, people of color. And I can say this because I'm not on a faculty and I'm not a student. So I'm, immune from their attacks, although, of course, I've been attacked, as every conservative has, on this issue. Everybody knows that the standards are rigged. They're rigged for African Americans, so-called Native Americans, Hispanics. You notice that there's no such thing as white Hispanics when it comes to rigging admission standards so Hispanics can get more places. There's only white Hispanics when the left wants to lynch somebody. Then you go for the white guy. You can't lynch a Hispanic if you're a leftist. Hypocrisy in this country is just so unbelievable at this point in time. We got blacks because they were brought here in chains. We got Native Americans because we stole the land from them. We got Hispanics because we stole the land southwest from them. We got Pacific Islanders because 100 years ago America had a little lapse, and the only colonies it got were Pacific Islands. If you're Sri Lankan, and I've had Sri Lankans complain to me. I do a lot of radio shows, and they call in. I had this girl say, I'm very dark skinned. I study really hard, but they tell me I'm white because I don't qualify by these leftist categories. This has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with oppression. It has to do with what the left chooses to privilege. If you open your mouth on certain issues, if you were to suggest that, and of course nobody knows what actually happened between Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. Nobody. But if you were to suggest that maybe it was self-defense, it's possible that George Zimmerman did not follow Trayvon Martin, and then when he was told not to, he went back to his truck, and Trayvon Martin went after him and was beating his head on the sidewalk, which is the way you die, when George Zimmerman shot him. Now that I'm not a lawyer. I mean, that still may be manslaughter. But if you were to get up on the campus, or you to get up and defend George Zimmerman's right to a fair trial, you'd be called a racist. As somebody who, when I marched in my first, of course it was organized by the Communist Party, but civil rights, we carried signs supporting Harry Truman's Fair Employment Practices Commission in 1948, believe it or not. I was 9 years old. As somebody who's watched and supported the civil rights movement right through Martin Luther King, it's appalling to me to see what's happened. Black America is now behaving like Southern crackers. It's a lynch mob. Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, that's what their profession is. They're lynch mob leaders. Sharpton has gotten 7 or 8 people killed, inciting mobs to go after them. Both Jackson and Sharpton, and not just Jackson and Sharpton, of course, because the country has been seized by this racist mentality against whites, is what it is, although you can't really say that without being looked on as a racist, right? You all remember the Duke case, where the 3 lacrosse players were accused by a drug-addicted, criminal, pathological liar, prostitute, of raping her, when the other prostitute there said they didn't. For a solid year, the whole country, well, not the whole country, but Time, Newsweek, the networks, that part of the country, led by racists like Sharpton and Jackson, destroyed these young men. They were thrown out of school. The lacrosse team was shut down. No evidence, not a shred of evidence against them. That's a lynch mob. That's where this mentality, we call it political correctness, like it makes it sound almost innocent. But this is the most intimidating force in America. To call people a racist shuts them down. People can't use their common sense. It's like you can't use your common sense in women's studies and say, hey, the neuroscientists over there, they've got all these empirical experiments that show there's a difference between men and women. There's a difference between heterosexuals and gays. I mean, you observe it. These aren't people, I mean, think of the contempt that progressives have for whatever, women, gays, whatever. They're all brainwashed. So, it's like the anti-Semites. I mean, the Jews are like 0.002% of the world's population, but they run it. It shows contempt for the people that you think you're defending, to say that they're brainwashed all the time. They don't do anything. They have no volition of their own. They allow themselves to be socially constructed. I think the gay thing is really interesting because there are so many different kinds of gays. So, now, to just bring this all to a head, the greatest threat to free speech is looming on the horizon in the form of Islam. Now, let me make the caveat here. Of course, there are good Muslims and there are bad Muslims, just like there are good Christians and bad Christians and good Jews and bad Jews. And the vast majority of Muslims probably have nothing more driving them than to keep their families together, to keep their kids out of trouble, to put food on the table, and to get along with everybody. That said, Islam is undergoing a dramatic reformation in the wrong direction. This ludicrously called Arab Spring is really a deep Muslim Brotherhood winter. The Muslim Brotherhood is an organization that was founded by an admirer of Hitler and a rabid Jew hater named Hassan al-Banna. But it reflects this wave in the Islamic world to convert the whole world to Islam. Islam is not a religion like Christianity or Judaism, but let's just take Christianity. It's an obvious example. Anybody who says this Islam isn't problematic is just not looking at the facts. Christians worship a carpenter who was a non-violent human being, who never preached a violent word or did a violent deed. Muhammad was a warrior who spread his religion by the sword, who massacred whole tribes, committed genocide, and who preached hatred of infidels. Jesus did not say hate infidels. Now, that wouldn't make any difference since Muhammad died, 1,500 years ago, something like that. Except that there's imams all over the world screaming it from the rooftops. Kill the Jews. The spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, has said in so many words that Muslims will finish the job that Hitler started. The Party of Allah, which is known as Hezbollah, that's what it means, Party of Allah. The head of Hezbollah has said that he hopes the Jews gather in Israel so he won't have to hunt them down globally. The head of Hamas, which is a creation of the Muslim Brotherhood, has said the Jews are headed for oblivion. And if you go on the web, you can go up to Memory, where they just translate the broadcasts, both in the West Bank, but in Egypt and throughout the Arab Muslim world and non-Arab. They teach their children to hate Jews and want to kill them. They have the identical mentality to Nazis. Hitler hid the final solution from the Germans because he thought they were too civilized to accept it. Ahmadinejad shouts it from the rooftops and also says he wants to wipe us out, all Americans. Where is the dissenting voice in the Muslim world to all this hatred? Now, I bring this up in the connection with free speech because if you think that the only threat from what's called radical Islam, but is really the emerging Islam, is terrorist attacks, you're missing what's really going on. This is a movement to establish Islam as an imperial religion in the United States and everywhere else. And in order to do that, it has to silence critics. Just as black racists like Jackson and Sharpton want to silence critics of their policies by calling them racists, so Islamists want to make criticism of Islam a form of blasphemy, because that's what they believe. And in fact, the whole idea of free speech comes out, is born as an anti-blasphemy movement. That's how our country was founded. It was founded by religious dissenters who fled religious persecution in Europe and came to America. And that's why it's the First Amendment, because you can't be persecuted on the basis of your creed. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood has created a word to define the new blasphemy, and it's called Islamophobia. Guess where they got that? Islamophobia. They have passed resolutions. There are 57 Muslim countries that dominate the United Nations, and they have passed resolutions condemning. They want to make it a crime to be offensive to Islam. I've published ads. Well, actually, it's very hard to get an ad in a college paper that dissents from the orthodoxy. But the Muslim Students Association, you don't have a significant one here, but on other campuses, they're quite large. They are creatures of the Muslim Brotherhood. They have organized and sponsored Israel and hate weeks, which are really just Jew hate weeks, across the country. 9 former presidents in the United States of the Muslim Students Association have gone on to careers as high-level operatives and leaders in Al-Qaeda and other terrorist movements. The most famous one is Anwar al-Awlaki, who was the mentor of the Fort Hood massacre and the Christmas bomber, whom the United States, Obama assassinated in Yemen. It's interesting, isn't it, for those of you who can remember that there was one civilian injured in Iraq, the New York Times and all the media would go crazy. They attacked Bush for putting terrorists caught on the field of battle but never tried in Guantanamo without a trial. Obama assassinates whole families with using drones in Pakistan who are only suspected of being terrorists. There's no complaint. This just to show you the unbelievable double standard in the country. But anyway, I tried to take out an ad just saying, where are they now? And posting that. And I did it at Anwar al-Awlaki's alma mater, or tried to, Colorado State. They won't print the ad. And then I was attacked, and Ohio State printed the ad, and of course I was attacked as a racist and anti-Muslim. I'm not anti-Muslim. I have an event going on today in Temple University. It's called Islamic Apartheid Week. Because the greatest oppression of women in the world is conducted by Muslims. 90% of the women in Egypt have their clitorises sliced off as adolescents without anesthetic. It's a Muslim, we call it Muslim custom, Muslim practice. You got a women's studies department here. There's not a peep coming out of it about this abuse of young girls. Because women's studies isn't about women. It's about that fantasy future. It's about radicalism. It's about anti-Americanism. That's what it's about. You go into women's studies course, you learn that in America we have gender oppression, class oppression, race oppression. That's what it's about. But they don't care about the oppression of real people, real women. If you're a Muslim woman in a Muslim country, you're chattel. Some of these countries, you can't go out in the streets without having somebody to mind you. I mean, as a man, I'm offended by this. But if I were a woman, I'd be screaming about it. But there's not a feminist on this campus that's doing that. In fact, they justify it. So Islam is set out, actually at UCLA and at UC Santa Barbara, where after I spoke, they passed anti-Islamophobia resolutions by their student councils. And how is Islamophobia defined? If you say that women are mistreated in Islam, you're an Islamophobe. If you say that Muslims invoke the Quran to kill innocent people, you're an Islamophobe. If you say Islam is a political religion, you're an Islamophobe. And if they have their way, you'll be a criminal. To me, it's very frightening, the very idea of hate crimes. That's a thought crime. The first hate crime that went to the Supreme Court took place in Wisconsin. 2 blacks had gone to see Mississippi Burning, which is about the murder of civil rights workers. And they came out of the theater really mad, understandably so. And they saw a white kid across the street. And one of them said to the other, "Let's go F him up." And the other one said, no, don't do that. And the first one went across the street and beat the crap out and put this kid in the hospital. So they were both charged. Well, no, excuse me. The first one said, "Let's go F him up." And the second one said, "Okay." And then he said, he didn't really mean it. And they put the kid in the hospital. So they were both charged. One with assault and battery, the one who beat him up, and the other one was charged with assault and battery, and they added 2 years for a hate crime. Now, people snap all the time. You get very mad. You can say things that you really don't mean or really regret having said. But they're going to prosecute you on the basis that you intended that's who you are. We shouldn't try people for their thoughts. It's very, very basic. That's the principle throughout this. And why free speech, as I say, is the most important freedom we have. It's the one that's most under attack and that I'm most worried about. I feel that, well, I feel I've written a book called Unholy Alliance about what I see as the convergence of the left and the Islamists. And the left has embraced Hezbollah and has embraced Hamas, Jew killers, and has embraced the narrative in which the Jews deserve that Iranian nuclear bomb they're building. Very, very terrible times we live in. And the universities are unfortunately a big part of the problem. Now, this is a wonderful institution. It's biomedical engineering, neuroscience, all of the professional schools. And there are genuinely decent professors here who are interested in knowledge and not interested in proselytizing and not interested in indoctrination. But the setup at this school, as at other schools, is very hostile to diversity of thought. If it weren't, they would go out of their way to find conservative voices to speak to students. I'm happy to have come here, grateful that some students are interested in hearing me, but this campus is not interested in hearing me. Certainly not the professors. And the students are, oblivious. And I'm not speaking of, this is not a personal thing. I'm getting tired. I canceled my flight to Williamsport last night. It took me 5 hours because the driver didn't know where the heck he was going to get here. So it's not like I have a burning desire to appear before, throngs at Bucknell. But that's not the point. The point is that there's, unless you're an Ann Coulter, which means really funny, really good looking, really smart, and a national, what my son calls a phenomenon. Nobody's going to listen to you. Nobody's going to come to hear you if you're a conservative. And that is a shame, both for all the students, and I think especially liberal students. As a young radical, I got myself into a lot of trouble. I got involved in things that I, regret to this day. And I wish that I could save other young, idealistic students the grief that I suffered. And I wish I could save my country as well. Thank you.
I think we have a little bit of extra time for some questions, so.
Mr. Horowitz, thank you for being here. I have a question, not necessarily in terms of academic freedom, but freedom of mind and freedom of speech very broadly. Nancy Pelosi recently came out and proposed that Congress proposed an amendment to the First Amendment regulating the say of big business and corporations in terms of their engagement in the political realm.
Yeah, because they want their unions to do their speaking for them.
And I guess my question for you is, how do you propose, as a conservative, that we combat this? Because
one, I'm against amending the Constitution.
Yes. I'm
against it when conservatives want to do it as well. Our country is deeply divided. It hasn't been so divided since the Civil War. And therefore, you don't want, the only thing that connects us is the Constitution. And the Constitution is already under assault from the left. And you have Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is an extreme leftist, an extreme one, that Orrin Hatch just walked through the process, and Republicans voted for her. She's just an ideologue, and who said that the South African Constitution, which is a leftist constitution, is better than ours. People on the left, progressives, hate the American Constitution for this reason. It's a constitution about limiting government. It's a constitution that stands up for individual rights. What the progressives want is a constitution that empowers people. You have a right to free medical care. You have a right to a home. Well, of course, that isn't a right. What that is a privilege to take from whomever Nancy Pelosi designates, take away their taxes to fund your free medical care, take away their wealth to fund your home, and so forth. These people, their mentality is, communist. That's what it is. And I know this because I used to read the Daily Worker when I was a kid, and I can tell you that when I read what leftists say, it's exactly what I used to read in the Daily Worker. There's no difference. The fact that Howard Zinn was a, mindless Stalinist, supported every communist dictator throughout his life, has the most popular history. I just saw, what is this woman who, Denham, who does Girls, the TV show Girls. On her reading list, she says, I don't know anything about history, so I'm going to read Howard Zinn. You're not going to know anything about history after you've read him. What you will know is to hate your country. You just have to fight this. I think conservatives are way too polite. When they get nasty, it's so obvious. They have to apologize immediately. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, nasty is her way of life. With conservatives, it's like, I think George Bush, the father, once had an outburst. But it was so obvious and stupid when he did it. But these people live it. You got to just fight them. And, stop calling them liberals. They are not liberal. Don't say classical liberal. They're not liberal. They don't believe in two sides. Look at this room. They don't believe in two sides. They should be dying to have conservatives come here and liven it up. They only want to hear themselves talk. Go ahead.
Mr. Horowitz, thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate you coming. I want to share a couple of comments and then ask you a question. I'm a 1959 graduate of Bucknell University, so we have something in common, our graduation and our age. When I was a student here, and I love this place, you never knew in the classroom the political leaning of a professor. I keep referring to Dr. Jim Gaddings, who was my political science professor. He died in the wall Democrat. You never knew that in this classroom. And I'm just aghast at what happened.
The left over 30 or 40 years has destroyed the modern research university in the liberal arts schools.
Right.
The rest of the university is fine.
Another observation, about 2 or 3 weeks ago on a Sunday morning, I was watching Fox and Friends, and I just happened to catch my attention. Somebody came on to report on the top 5 universities in the country, and I don't know if any of you saw this, that are against free speech. And I just wanted to listen. I remember Harvard as being one. I think Stanford was one. I think St. Augustine. I don't know the 4th one, but Bucknell University was the 5th one.
Well, there was an incident here that the kids could tell you about.
It was the donut.
The affirmative action bake sale. The left they can't stand to have a dissenting opinion in the room. They have to squash it, which they did, and violated these kids' First Amendment rights.
Education here now is between $50,000 and $55,000 a year.
Well, yeah, it was 56 with the boarding.
Is there ever any hope that college campuses will again, with their professors and the faculty, at least get back to the middle with some balance?
No.
Or is it?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
These people, they have lifetime jobs. They hire their friends. There are no standards. There's the fact that this women's studies department exists. And look, it's not just women's studies. There's women's studies professors in every other department with the same mentality. They have destroyed, it was a culture, and they have destroyed that culture. I wrote a book called Reforming Our Universities, which tells the sad story of my efforts to reform it. I got no support, or I shouldn't say that. Sean Hannity supported me. I got no significant support from the conservative movement or the Republican Party. I got a little bit. And we could have achieved a lot. But if you read that, you'll see what the forces arranged against it. Basically, faculty run the university. I didn't bring up the story of Larry Summers. Larry Summers, the most powerful president in the history of the modern research university. He came with money. He had David Rockefeller behind him. He had he was a cabinet minister. He was a liberal, so he fit in with the culture, and he's a brilliant economist. Within 4 years, he was done. He challenged the anti-Semites, and the left is an anti-Semitic force. He challenged this airhead, Cornel West. Now, Cornel West hasn't produced a scholarly piece of work in his entire life, even his PhD thesis, okay? But Cornel West was taking off time to advise Al Sharpton on his run for the presidency, Bill Bradley, I forget the other, whoever was winning, I can't remember, whatever. I don't remember the third campaign. He took a year off to produce a rap record in which he was the rapper. And Summers, and he was a university professor. There are 2,000 professors at Harvard, only 14 are honored as university professors. They don't report to anybody but the president. They don't have any, they can do whatever they want. And Summers called him in and said, you know, your rap record is an embarrassment to this university. You're a Harvard professor, not alone a university professor. I would like you to write a book that's reviewed in a peer review, that is in scholarly journals, even though they're all left, but scholarly journals and not just Time magazine. And I would like you not to give all your students A's. We have a problem with grade inflation. They give them all A's. Everybody signs up for the class and then likes to listen to Cornell rap in class. And Cornell walked out of that meeting and said, Larry Summers has a problem with black people. He's a racist. And Summers then made one other mistake, which was they had a seminar with 12. There was a dean. There was somebody from the EOC. There was a biology professor from MIT. 12 people to try to figure out why there weren't women weren't in the top jobs, chairman departments in the sciences. And Summers, you can read his comments. He said there were, I can think of 3 reasons, and he gave them in the order of importance. And the first one was that to get to the top of a profession, you have to put in 80 hours a week. And women are torn because they have children, and they take time off, and they just can't put in the 80 hours. That was one. The third one was lingering discrimination, although the majority of professors now are women. And the second one, is the one they hung him on, was that as studies show, women have a higher aptitude than men verbally, but a lower aptitude in mathematics. When he said that, the MIT professor slammed her computer shut and walked out and went right to the Boston Globe and said, Larry Summers has lowered the self-esteem of little girls in this country, even though no little girl would understand it in the first place, no little boy would. But if she hadn't told the Boston Globe, nobody would even know about it. And he became the first president in the history of the modern research university to be censored by his own faculty. And it wasn't his faculty. There are 2,000 members. 200 voted to censor him. But that's because the left, since it's on a mission to change the world, to redeem it, that's why it's so dangerous. They like politics. They like office politics. They like to come to meetings. True scholars don't. And so that's how they dominate. So to me, it's just, the only thing I can see is if enough students just stop signing up for liberal arts courses, maybe they'll disappear. It's tragic because I was a liberal arts major, English major when I was in school. Yes?
What type of advice would you give to a student that wants to feel like they can express their own views in both their spoken dialogue in class or written work in papers, but doesn't want to compromise their marks for fear of being
No, I never. Look, get your degree, get your recommendations. Don't fight quixotic battles. Choose your ground. I mean, you could probably judge whether a professor is going to punish you or not for what you say in class. I wouldn't. They're ruthless. I mean, the bad ones, and there are many of them, are unprincipled and ruthless and vindictive, and they will make your life miserable. I'm not. Don't try to be a hero, especially when you're paying $56,000 a year. I mean, get the degree, and revenge is best. What is it? Enjoyed cold or something. Served cold.
How many card-carrying communists do you think?
It's irrelevant. I'm sorry that Alan West said that. He's right. The entire Progressive Caucus, they're communists. You listen to Maxine Waters. I mean, she's the one that blurts it out, but that's the way they all think. But the Communist Party is not an important party, and it hasn't been. It's the idea. The idea is very simple. If we get enough power, and particularly power over people's minds, which is why free speech is a threat to us. If we get enough power, we can make this paradise. That's the powerful idea. That's the one that gets you. It's that parties aren't important anymore. And it's pervasive. I mean, there's a 130, I didn't mention this, but this is how dangerous I think the situation we're in is. The Center for American Progress is the brain trust of the Democratic Party. It's funded by Soros. It has $38 million a year. Somebody, is that you, Floyd? Or
I think it's me. I was trying to be discreet.
Somebody saying good night? Oh, you're going the wrong way. They put out a 138-page pamphlet on Islamophobia and put all of us in that pamphlet. We used to have a two-party system. You can't trust the Democratic Party. It's too dangerous. And, I'm a great believer in the two-party system. First of all, if you have one party, it's corrupting. Look what the Republicans did when they had all three, branches. They dug a huge hole, didn't they? It's just corrupting. Washington is corrupting it. So I also believe that you have to have the two sides. There are people who go more with the heart and others who go more with the head, and nobody really knows. So you want to have the balance. I mean, I don't like the word balance because it makes it sound even, but you want that contest between the soft and the hard, you always want that. So I think it's very tragic what's happened to the Democratic Party. The fact that Joe Lieberman, a 90%, whatever it was, ACLU liberal, 90%, one dissent on the war in Iraq. I mean, a noble one, but one. And they drove him out. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you all.